We are, as always, delighted to have you with us today. Welcome in, everybody. We've got a terrific lineup on tap for you this time. We're just one day away from another battle in the race for the White House. Tomorrow, Republicans caucus in Nevada. GOP frontrunner Donald Trump is hoping for another victory after his big win in South Carolina. Now the Democrats are in the South courting the crucial African-American vote. Correspondent Kenneth Moten has the latest on all of it.
This week is the early presidential contest switch.
We just won Nevada!
It's the Democrats' turn in the Deep South, while the Republicans are now out west in Nevada for tomorrow's caucuses.
We're going to keep winning. We're going to make America great again.
This morning, Donald Trump is still riding high after his big weekend win in South Carolina. He scored all 50 of the state's delegates, winning evangelical voters.
You know, I didn't know I was going to win by that much. And we won by a lot, and that was sort of record-setting stuff.
The GOP pack is down to 5 contenders. Jeb Bush out. The 2 Cuban-American freshman senators left to battle it out to become the Trump alternative.
Donald Trump has demonstrated that he has a relatively high floor of support, but he's also got, I think, a ceiling.
Nevada caucus winner Hillary Clinton is favored in South Carolina. She's already focused on the Super Tuesday states, like Texas, where she rallied over the weekend.
Some may have doubted us, but we never doubted each other.
It was also another big rally for Bernie Sanders in Greenville, South Carolina. He got some celebrity help from actor Danny Glover. Sanders is working to court the black vote, which led to an awkward, lukewarm reception at this predominantly African-American church. Tomorrow night, Sanders and Clinton will hit the stage for a Democratic town hall at the University of South Carolina. The Republicans will spend today rallying in Nevada, where the latest poll has Trump leading by 26 points. Kenneth Moten, ABC News, Washington.
Joining us now, our friend Steve Shepard. He's campaigns and elections editor for Politico. It is great to see you.
Always.
Hardly a weekend off. In fact, quite the opposite. This was a very, very intense weekend, a very intense set of contests, a real moment, arguably, in the chase for both the Republican and the Democratic presidential nomination. And in terms of where to start, I scarcely know where to begin, I guess. Let's talk about Hillary Clinton. Or sort of reestablishing the notion that after New Hampshire, she had some states and some organization and some appeal that would help her get into the win column, because this was and you can just feel in terms of her victory speech and her demeanor, she was very, very relieved to get even a narrow win in Nevada.
Right. Look, we're in the beginning of a run of states that are very good for Hillary Clinton. Nevada on Saturday, South Carolina this coming Saturday. Super Tuesday, most of the states that'll vote on Super Tuesday have the Democratic primary electorates will be composed largely of African-American voters. That's really good for Hillary Clinton. You saw she did among African-Americans in Nevada on Saturday. Bernie Sanders has a couple of states that he's going to win. He'll win in Vermont. He'll probably win in Massachusetts. After that, he's trying to compete in Colorado, Oklahoma, Minnesota, some states that he really needs to pick off. Otherwise, we could be looking back March 1st, March 5th, and saying, you know what, he won New Hampshire and he won Vermont and Massachusetts, and that is his appeal, and Hillary Clinton largely has this thing sewn up. Big tests ahead.
This could have turned out somewhat differently, because in the days leading up to Nevada, we saw polls tightening to the point where they were in the statistical margin of error, and I think everyone was wondering, is Bernie Sanders about to replicate the type, you had a tight performance in Iowa, basically a tie in Iowa, huge win in New Hampshire that was expected, but still sort of eye-popping because of the size of the victory that he got, and people started wondering, does he do it again in Nevada, and what does it mean for Clinton if he does?
No, you're absolutely right. The fact she won, and she didn't just win narrowly. I mean, 6 points is not a huge win, but it is a significant victory. It shows the strength of her organization. Nevada, look, we're going to see this tomorrow night with the Republicans, and not to change gears here, but organization really matters. And she had the organization, and he didn't. And we're moving into some other caucus states where he's hoping to do well. Colorado is a convention caucus state. Minnesota is a caucus state. These are places he needs to win, because he's going to get blown out in South Carolina this Saturday, and states like Alabama, Georgia, Texas that are going to vote on Super Tuesday.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like, and I believe from the reporting that I read on Politico.com and elsewhere, that Hillary Clinton pulled the plug on 2 trips to South Carolina from Nevada that had been scheduled. Of course, you run the risk that you hurt yourself when you cancel events, because people might think you're taking them for granted or for whatever reason, but she felt like her time was best spent in Nevada, and it appears that calculation was the right one. It appears to have paid off.
Now, her campaign really doubled down on Nevada. They poured more money into advertising. They got outspent by the Sanders campaign in Iowa and New Hampshire. In Nevada, they didn't let that happen. They spent more money there. They really needed a win there, and they got a significant one.
Talk, if you would, Steve, about Donald Trump getting the win in South Carolina and outperforming Ted Cruz among evangelicals in a state that I don't think could have been teed up better for Ted Cruz than South Carolina.
Yeah, that was actually pretty surprising. I thought Cruz would do better among evangelicals than he did. Trump beat him, and Rubio wasn't that far behind. I think this spells a little bit of trouble for Ted Cruz. He has basically a week to really, Nevada is not really his state. I think that's going to largely be Trump and Rubio fighting over that. But Super Tuesday, there are a lot of states on the calendar, starting with Texas, obviously, and his home state, but into Alabama, into Arkansas, into Georgia, states where he needs to do well to build up a delegate advantage that once the race moves north, where he doesn't have as much appeal, he can withstand whether it's Trump, whether it's Rubio, whether it's Kasich breathing down his neck. If he has those delegates in the bank, he can withstand that. The problem is if he does as poorly among evangelicals as he did in South Carolina, Donald Trump, Marco Rubio steal delegates from him, and then it's difficult to see how the map only gets worse for Ted Cruz after March 1st. This is really his prime time, and he needs to run up the score.
Marco Rubio has yet to find the win column, and yet you can't help but feel like things are going okay for him right now, because he will no doubt go out and say, Donald Trump is a clown. You got to be kidding me. This guy is a lot of things. The guy sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office should not be one of them. This Marco Rubio's pitch. Cruz underperforming in places where you would think if he was going to get early wins, it would be in a place like South Carolina. So now as the field narrows and people get a clearer set, or certainly a smaller set of options, does Marco Rubio take advantage of the moment that appears to be here?
Things are trending really well for Marco Rubio, but there are still problems. The biggest problem right now is John Kasich. John Kasich wants to stay in the race till at least March 15th because that's the date of the Ohio primary, which is winner take all. He can bank a huge number of delegates by winning his home state, where he just won re-election in 2014 with more than 60% of the vote. So he's very popular there. If he can win Ohio, he holds a lot of cards, and we get to a point then. Look, if the race is just Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Donald Trump, that sets up really well for Marco Rubio because the anti-establishment vote gets split between Trump and Cruz. That said, if Kasich stays in the race, Kasich won 20%, they weren't a huge number, of moderate and liberal voters in South Carolina. If he keeps taking those moderate and liberal voters away from Rubio in the March 1st states and in other March 15th states, like also Rubio's home state of Florida, that could be trouble. Marco Rubio could be the establishment frontrunner on March 15th, after March 15th, and have very few delegates as opposed to Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, who have a ton of delegates in the bank. And it makes it very difficult. The math wouldn't necessarily work for him, even though the party is really aligning to back him.
Coming out of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, Steve, can you talk about how the style of campaigning and the campaign writ large changes because of the number of miles people have to travel, the number of contests being held on a given day, etc.
Right. Ted Cruz won Iowa because he basically camped out there for months. John Kasich finished second in New Hampshire because he held more town halls than anybody else. Now we move to states where there are 10, 11, 12, or dates where there are 10, 11, 12 states voting at the same time. You can't be everywhere. You can't be on the airwaves and spending money on television advertising everywhere. March 15th, you have states like Florida, Ohio, North Carolina. These are huge states that are really expensive to play in. And even if you travel, do you go to Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville, Orlando, Raleigh, Charlotte, all these different places to travel, all these different places to spend money. Really, it comes down to a lot of earned media. What's your news coverage like? And who's the king of earned media in this campaign, who has spent relatively little on the airwaves but gotten all the attention, including from us, including in your package that opened this up? Donald Trump.
So you end up with a situation where you spend a lot of your time on a plane You land, step off the plane. This is what they call the tarmac campaign or something like that, right? You literally.
We used to call it the whistle stop campaign, but where you barely stopped in a town on the train. Now,
right.
Obviously, things are done by air, and that's true.
But you might get off a plane, go to a set of microphones, give a speech, and get back on the plane and go somewhere else. I mean, that is literally your investment, let's call it, in a Raleigh or a Columbus, to cite the great list that you just offered. You're not at the coffee shop. You're not talking policy in any in-depth way. Voters are not getting the chance to meet multiple candidates or to see a given candidate 2 or 3 times. It all changes dramatically.
And also, keep in mind, this week we're going to have another Republican debate in Texas. The stakes will be high for that. You know, these candidates, this is the way that most voters across these 10, 11, 12 states are going to see them in the week leading up to the campaign, because candidates can't physically be everywhere, but they'll all be on one stage down in, I believe, Houston on Thursday night, and that is where a lot of these voters will get their exposure to the candidate.
Talk about the trajectory of Jeb Bush from very high expectations at the moment that he got in to now being forced to abandon his bid for the White House because he just never caught on in any of the early contests that we've been talking about.
No, he really didn't. Jeb Bush had been out of politics for 8 years. He had run his last campaign in 2002 when he ran for re-election as governor of Florida. The name, the voters' desire for something new, all of these different things played against him. All the money in the world didn't help him.
And they had all the money. I mean, golly,
a lot of raised over $100 million for his super PAC. Basically, before he even jumped into the race as an official candidate. It's stunning in a way. He was hoping that would be the shock and awe fundraising that would keep people like Marco Rubio, who's a political protege of his, out of the race. Not only did it not work in keeping other candidates out of the race, but it didn't work also in moving voters into his corner.
So are we in a situation now where, yes, Donald Trump's the front runner, and yes, we're going to see whether Marco Rubio can take advantage of a slightly altered dynamic from a week ago? Are we in a position, though, given how unpredictable politics are, where there's at least something of a case to be made for all the people who were left going the distance, winning the nomination?
I would say that Ben Carson has less of a case. He seems to be fading out. He's staying in the race. He's keeping his name out there. He's writing books. He's certainly raising money for his political organization. We understand that. His path to the nomination is basically closed. John Kasich has a very, very, very narrow path. He's going to get clobbered on March 1st because these states don't set up well for him. It's a lot of conservative southern states like South Carolina, where he finished 5th this past week, and that was coming off of the momentum of New Hampshire. Now that momentum has been stunted. It's difficult to see how he does well in the next week. But if he wins Ohio and it gets down to a contested convention, he's got all those delegates in his pocket, and he could be a factor.
Steve Shepard, Campaigns and Elections Editor for Politico. Great job. Great as always to have you here. Thank you very much for your time. We'll talk with you again soon. When we return, speed cameras positioned to maximize revenue. We'll preview an ABC 7 I-Team investigation with reporter Chris Pabst.